Well, welcome back, everybody. You guys get a good break? Everybody have a nice break there? Yep. Who got to help hold an alligator? A bunch of you I saw got to hold out. That's a real, for all you'll watch on camera, we took pictures. Maybe we'll shoot some footage of that separately afterwards, John. Can we do that? Of the alligator, before the alligator crawls away to wherever it goes. In a nice, safe place. I know that the Wildlife Command Center does an incredible job. Really excited for them to come up, and Michael Baran, their leader, to speak with us in just a few minutes, and he's getting ready right now. With that, we got to get into our next awesome speaker, who is a personal friend from years ago. I'll even tell them one little story. I get calls from friends periodically that mention, "Hey, Cowboy, do you know somebody at Busch Stadium?" No guard, no cowboy. So they said, "Yeah, man." He says, "I think I'm going to propose to my wife, or fiance, or at the time girlfriend, I guess." But and I said, "Let me hook that up." And it happened, right? It did. And that was pretty cool. So I was like, "Good guy. I really want to help my friends." And not everybody wants that because of but I would like that. That's pretty neat. And we did that. It was pretty neat. But David, I've known for years as a consultant, as just a business person, just somebody, and he's also a pastor too, on top of everything. But he is the marriage coach, and he's here to talk about how in life, very often, we don't all have the tools. We don't all have the resources to salvage a relationship that maybe could be salvaged. And you can have, as you can see, it says, so they're turning roommates into soulmates. And wouldn't that be so cool? Because it's just that short period of time we have on this planet, and you want to spend it with somebody you love and can spend it and make a great relationship with. So give a warm welcome to David Rispoli.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and just have an opportunity just to briefly share it with you. Carter, thank you so much for hosting this, putting this on. The speakers that I've heard have been phenomenal, and I'm excited about the speakers that are to come. My topic really is about this next level and how to take your life to the next level. So regardless of where you're at in terms of your marriage status or your relationship status, I have two goals. One goal is not to bore you, and the second goal is that you will leave here with something that I've shared with you that is profoundly helpful. And that's my goal. I want to start by telling a story. It happened at the turn of the last century. There was a rabbi who was middle-aged, and he was just going through a really hard time. He was living in Russia at the time, and he was a little depressed. Things weren't working out well with his parishioners, and he just had insomnia. He couldn't sleep. And so one day, this rabbi took to the streets in the evening and started to walk the streets there in Russia. And he was deep in thought. His head was down. He just kept walking and walking and walking. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when he failed to notice a sign that said, "Warning, do not enter." But because his head was down, he kept walking, and he missed the second sign that said, "Caution, do not enter." And he continued to walk, and finally he was brought to his senses by a Russian guard who screamed at the top of his lungs, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" And it brought him to his senses. Maybe it was the question, maybe it was the gun pointed at his head. He didn't know what to say. He was flabbergasted. And this young Russian guard a second time said, "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" And then this rabbi said, "Sir, how much do you get paid to work for the Russian army?" And the man said, "What business is that of yours? Who are you? And what are you doing here?" And the rabbi said to that man, "I will give you 10 times your wages to ask me that question every single day. Who are you? And what are you doing here?" The key to leveling up your life is really answering that question. Who are you? And what are you doing here? My name is David Rispoli, and I wear a lot of different hats. And I want you to know that for a great portion of my life, I didn't have a good answer for that question. I had two challenges growing up. I'm going to share them with you. My last name is Rispoli, and I did a stint in student teaching, substitute teaching, about 20 years ago, and I found that kids love that name. I was nicknamed Mr. Ravioli, and these kids were brutal. I did that a very short period of time. That was not my calling. But Rispoli is not a bad name. It's a very Italian name. My dad was full-blooded Italian. Now, I didn't mind being called Mr. Ravioli because my mother's maiden name was, and spelled exactly like it sounds, Lycopantis. So my mother's maiden name was Lycopantis, and she was full-blooded Greek. And so you have this full-blooded Greek who marries this full-blooded Italian. What do I look? Do I look Greek or Italian? I look neither, right? And the reason for that is I'm Irish. And it's not because when you bring a Greek and Italian together, you get an Irishman. It's I was adopted. And as a young person growing up, if you don't know much about adoption, one of the things that happens for young people who are adopted is frequently they wrestle with issues of abandonment. And even when you land in a beautiful home, you're always asking this question, why is it that the first people that should have loved me and could have loved me, and why is this mom who could have loved me, why did she give me away? And that was a question that I had. And so I really didn't know who I was, and I didn't know what I was doing here, and I really struggled. At the age of 16, I did something that I felt called to, and I did something to please my parents, my adopted parents. They were Roman Catholic, and at the age of 16, I had a phenomenal experience in the church, and I decided that I was going to become a priest. How many of you know that if you are Roman Catholic and you have a son who's going to be a priest, that's a big deal? Like, I'm telling you the truth, that's your ticket to heaven if you're Catholic. Your son becomes a priest. This is really, really good stuff. And so right out of high school, I went to Duquesne University, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I attended St. Paul's Seminary. And I was there for a year, and on the one hand, I loved it. It was absolutely amazing. But I also loved women. And that's a big problem if you're going to be a priest. So I was able to stay there for 1 year. And I'll never forget, at the end of the first year, my mom coming to the seminary to pick me up. Now keep in mind, for years and years, this is my son David. He's the one that's going to become the priest. So my mom and I would go to this Italian restaurant there in Pittsburgh, and we're sitting there, and my mom is wearing this beautiful white blouse, and she says, Dave, when do you have to be at the seminary in the fall? When do you have to go back? And I said, Mom, I am not going back. And the meatball leaped from her plate right onto her blouse. And she went into the bathroom where she didn't reemerge for at least an hour. And so there I'm sitting, and I'm asking the question, who am I? And what am I doing here? Well, my dad was a United States Marine, and his dad was a United States Marine. So as my mom was in the bathroom, I came to the conclusion that the thing that I needed to do was to enlist into the United States Marine Corps as a consolation prize to my parents. So I went from the Catholic seminary, I went to the Paris Island, South Carolina, where the United States trains their Marines. And I became a United States Marine. 16 weeks at Paris Island. I thought the Catholic seminary was bad. And anyone here as a Marine knows that it's one of the most proud things that you'll ever do. But what happens is when you get there, you're like, I've made the biggest mistake in my life. My son is also a United States Marine. Anthony is a fourth generation Marine. I'm so proud of him. Yeah. I still felt very called to the ministry. And so I was able to eventually get into a reserve contract, and I went back to college. I went to Slippery Rock University. Anybody ever hear of Slippery Rock University? All right, so there's one. So if you don't believe there's a school called Slippery Rock, ask them in the back. Matt Adams, who was the first baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals, is also a graduate of Slippery Rock. And then I went on to get my first master's degree. I went to Gettysburg, and I was ordained a Lutheran pastor. It was the largest church in Pennsylvania, the largest Lutheran church in Pennsylvania. And I'll never forget, I had been there for 6 months when something happened that changed my life forever. This was the first thing. Here's what happened. I got my student loan payment. And I looked at what the church was paying me, and I looked at that student loan payment, and I said, there is no way this is going to work. And so I went to the leadership of the church, and I said, hey, listen, I can't afford my student loans. You're either going to have to pay me more, or I'm going to have to leave, or maybe you could let me become bivocational. Well, they didn't want to lose me, and they didn't want to pay me anymore, so they said, why don't you become bivocational, which was wonderful. That same day, that very same day, I received a phone call. It was from a woman I had never met before. And here's what she said. She said, Pastor Rispoli, we understand you're a brand new pastor in the area. I said, yes. She said, well, my name is Nancy, and we just started a hospice here in Hanover, Pennsylvania, and we are looking for a hospice chaplain. Now, we can't pay you, but if you have student loans, they'll be deferred. Now, I didn't know what hospice was, and I didn't know what student loans deferred meant. All I knew was I wasn't going to have to make that minimum payment, right? So I said, sign me up. And I became a hospice chaplain. So the very first person that I went to, and I was about 28 years old at the time, I had no training in hospice. I very quickly learned what hospice was. Hospice could have been the guy that follows the elephants in the circus, and I would have done it. But the very first guy that I went to see was 52 years old. His name was Ed. And Ed had a trach that he spoke through. He had just retired. He had just sold a multi-million-dollar business. And he had planned on traveling the world when, within a week of his retirement, he's diagnosed with this fast-moving throat cancer, and he's told that he has 6 months to live. And this man is angry. He is angry. He's like, I tried to live a good life. I tried to do the right thing as he's speaking through this tube. But he was mad at me. He was mad at God. He was mad at his family. He was mad at his doctors. He was mad at everyone. And there I am, 28 years old, sitting across the couch. What do you say to somebody who says, this isn't fair. I'm about to die. I'm only 52 years old. Well, I didn't know what to say. I had had no training. And so I did the only thing I could do. I cried with this guy. I just cried with him. And at the end of the visit, I said to him the only thing that could come to my mind. Here's what I said. I said, listen, Ed, you're still here right now. You got to remember to live today. Remember to live today. Well, Ed took me up on that. Later, he would say he lived more in the next 6 months than he had his entire life. He became softer with his wife and kinder. He had a broken relationship with his brother. He hadn't talked to his brother in 2 decades. He reconciled with his brother. He had never told his 3 children, and there's some men in this room who have never heard these words from their father, I love you. He had never heard those words. The kids had never heard those words. All 3 of those kids heard those words from their dad, I love you, and I'm proud of you. He did small, short day trips. He really lived life. About 6 months after I met him, now Ed is bedbound, and I'll go and I sit down on his bed and we do our visits. And one day I went to visit him, and I'm sitting down on his bed, and because he's close now, and I get up to leave, and he pulls me back, and he pulls me as close as he possibly can. I said, what is it, Ed? And he says these words to me. He says, Dave, remember to live today. And in those 6 months, I had said that phrase to no less than a dozen of other hospice patients, but nobody had ever said that to me. At 28 years of age, Dave, remember to live today. Wow. I thought about all the reasons I wasn't living. I was going to live when my church got so big. I was going to live when my kids got older. I was going to live when I had so much money in the bank. I was going to start living when. And I was challenged to remember to live. I made a commitment on his bed, right then and there, that I would squeeze the heck out of every day for the rest of my life. That was the commitment I made. I'm just going to squeeze life every single day. And I left. Ed died that night. I never saw him again. But his gift to me was truly profound. Fast forward 30 years. I'm in Destin, Florida. I'm with another 52-year-old who's been diagnosed with cancer and has 6 months to live. And in the midst of that, we thought that she was being healed because she was so beautiful and so healthy and in no pain. And we get to Destin, and this 52-year-old is not a hospice patient. She's my wife. She's my best friend. She's my soulmate. And our entire marriage, and with our children, we have adopted and lived our entire marriage that philosophy that this is the day we have, you got to squeeze it. We have lived that life. And we're sitting there in the hospital in Destin, Florida, and she is actively dying. And I said, baby, are you afraid? And she said, Dave, I'm not afraid at all. She said, God is so good. And then she said these words, I love you, Scruff Dog. That was her nickname for me. And this woman literally died in my arms. She died in my arms at 52 years of age. And I want you to know that if it wasn't for Ed, my story would be so different. But because of Ed, I adopted that, and we adopted that, and we still live it. You got to squeeze the heck out of every day. You want to level up your life? We all do. Let me share 5 quick things. The first thing is this. You were created on purpose and for a purpose. I'm not getting religious or spiritual on you, but I want you to know that you are here for a reason. You are not a mistake. You might have made mistakes. You might have messed some things up, but there is still a purpose for your life. Here's the second thing. At the end of our journey, and I've been a hospice chaplain for 28 years, at the end of your journey, the only thing that's going to matter is the quality of your relationships. That's it. Your life is directly proportionate to the quality of your relationships. We all know people that have a whole lot of money and a whole lot of toys, but have horrible relationships and they're miserable. We all know people that don't have 2 dimes to rub together and they're incredibly happy. That's because when you are dying at the end of your journey, what happens is you don't say, bring me my checkbook. You don't say how much money's in my account. You don't say, bring me the degrees off the wall. You say, who's here with me? The quality of your life is directly proportionate to the quality of your relationships. Here's number 3. Life is short. Life is so short. It's a vapor. We're here today and we're gone tomorrow. So the time to make the move, the time to take action is today. The time to take your business to the next level, that's today. The time to tell your kids that you love them, that's today. The time to make things right with your spouse, that's today. Life is short. Here's the 4th thing. You're leaving a legacy. You are leaving a legacy. Every person in this room, you're leaving a legacy. I love to tell this story. It was not sure how many years ago, but many of us who are basketball fans are huge fans of Kobe Bryant. And I don't know if you had the opportunity to watch Kobe Bryant's funeral. I believe that it was at least 5 years ago. It was many years ago. But at his funeral, he had all these people come up and speak. One of the people that got up to speak was his wife. And she gave a beautiful eulogy about how Kobe was such a phenomenal husband. And how Kobe was such a great father to his children. And how he was such a great friend. And what a beautiful man he was. And then one of his kids got up and said, my dad was the best. He was always there for me. And the legacy that Kobe Bryant left was this, of a great family man who loved people, loved the sport, and made a difference in this world. He left a legacy where his family looked at him and just loved him. But it almost wasn't like that. Because it was 10 years before he died where the media was telling quite a different story. Where Kobe Bryant was up on rape charges, where his wife had filed for divorce, where he was having an affair. But somehow, someway, he got this idea. Life is short. It's really short. And if you have children, they're probably the most important people in your lives. And because life is short, and he was leaving a legacy, he changed his legacy. He wasn't the guy who was out there cheating. He wasn't the guy who was in the media all about basketball. He became a family man. He changed his legacy. I do St. Louis marriage coaching. I've done this for over 20 years. I'm the only counselor in the region, maybe in the United States, that offers all their clients, all of them, 100% money-back guarantee on my services. And the reason I do that is I can give people their money back all day long. But life is short. What I can't give them back is their time. And so when they leave my office, they know that they're going to get a great deal of value every single time. That's what I do. The final point, frequently, it's in our pain that our purpose shows up. It's in the broken areas in our life. I shared with you that I was adopted. I had never met my biological parents, had looked for them my entire life. 3 months after my wife, Kathy, died, I received a phone call from my daughter. She says, "Dad, are you sitting down?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Dad, I talked to your mom today. We thought that she had died." I said, "What? You talked to my Dad? She wants to talk to you. She wants to meet you." I had 2 questions my entire life. My first question was this: why didn't she love me? And then my second question is, why hadn't she found me? I had lived such a fairly high-profile life. Why hadn't she found me? So that night at 7 o'clock, it was during the Pittsburgh Steelers Sunday night football game, my mom calls and I talked to her for the very first time. And her first words to me were these: "David, it's your mother. I love you so much, and I've been looking for you your entire life." And in that instant, that empty cavern was filled. Who are you? And what are you doing here? The answer to that question is the key to leveling up. Thank you so much for listening.
Well, give it up for Mr. David Rispoli. So the song I got for that one is "We Found Love," right? What more appropriate for, we'll start welling up here, but the fact is that we're all looking for somebody to have that partnership with for a lifetime, and that we can truly love and enjoy life together. And so, David, thank you so much. David was my first guest on the Your Little Castle TV show. And I called him, I said, "I want to start the show off with a real leader in our community." And I called him, he said, "Absolutely, let's do this." And we've been doing 54 weeks in a row now with that. So